Welcome back to Legal Face Off. Another story we're covering today, Tina, is continuing to break news here in Chicago, and in particular, where you are in Evanston, your backyard, literally. This is the Northwestern Hazing scandal. We've learned that some additional alleged victims are planning on filing a lawsuit. Some have hired past Legal Face Off guest Ben Crump to represent them, and we're very privileged today to have Michael Levine from Stewart Tigman from Miami to discuss this case. And Michael, you have a particular experience with this issue as you have represented victims of hazing before. Welcome to the show.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So what's your take generally on how Northwestern has handled this entire scandal from the beginning? We know that their early approach was to suspend, now terminated, Pat Fitzgerald, who is the football coach, for a couple of weeks. That certainly didn't go over well because just a few days later, they announced that they were firing him. There's also been their men's baseball coach fired in a somewhat separate but related scandal. So what's your take on how the universities handle this whole affair?
Horrifically. Things are going from bad to worse for Northwestern. I just saw over the weekend, there's a women's volleyball player that filed a lawsuit as well. So now you've got an issue that is engulfing the entire program. Like you pointed out, the initial punishment for the football team was a 2-week midsummer suspension. I think that's really just a vacation. And you got to think people at Northwestern are wondering if they had come out from the jump and just fired the coach, would they be in this situation?
So, Michael, we heard from some of the alleged victims last week. Former quarterback Lloyd Yates discussed the code of silence. Why don't more players speak out about hazing?
Yeah, so, look, this is something that we've seen in the fraternity hazing cases that I've handled as well. And it's amplified in the athletic setting because these players want to play. I mean, some of the players are on scholarship. This is their ticket to getting their education. Other players may have professional aspirations. Other players just want to play. I spoke with the family of one of the current players, and they don't want to come forward because kid just wants to play football. And that's really why you're going to see, I've seen some former players step forward. I think we've yet to see a current player step into that limelight, and, for all the reasons we know.
Michael, let's talk about Mr. Yates a little further. He said that these activities, the alleged activities involving hazing, many of which allegedly involve sexual acts, they occurred, according to Yates and others, so close in proximity to the coaching staff that there's no way that they would not be aware of it. On the other hand, Pat Fitzgerald has hired one of the most prominent lawyers, certainly in Chicago, if not the country, and has already denied knowing about this. What do you think a jury would make of the former coach's denials?
I think it's unlikely. A big football program, Northwestern's about to put $800 million into rebuilding the football field. These football coaches and staff, they know when a player skips a class. They know when a player skips a workout. I don't think that anything went on in that locker room that the coaches didn't know about. But, significantly to a civil case, nobody's going to have to prove that the coach knew. They're going to have to prove that the coach should have known. And Northwestern seems to have already admitted that in their 1.5-page executive summary.
Now, you mentioned that summary. You mentioned what Northwestern's initial reaction should have been when this case, if it gets to trial. How deep do you think exposure is for the university? I mean, certainly they would hope that it would end with the sacrifices they've made with Fitzgerald and the baseball coach. But from your perspective, having represented victims like this, what would your argument be to the jury to maximize the recovery of these alleged victims? Again, Northwestern, deep pockets, large university, lots of alums. There's certainly some vast exposure for them.
Yeah. So, the exposure is a bit of a question mark, other than to say that it's huge. We haven't heard a ton about the damages of the individual victims. So we don't really know what we're dealing with. From Northwestern's report, from what we've been told, nobody was injured. Obviously, thankfully, nobody died. You may have PTSD claims, depression, things like that, the mental anguish behind that. And we shouldn't understate what those claims may be. But frankly, I think this is a case where not so much the damages are going to drive the case and I think ultimately drive a settlement from Northwestern. I think it's going to be the liability portion. You've got Northwestern coming out and admitting that they should have known what was going on. You have an athletic department in disarray. This has now reached 3 of the teams. Who knows if there's more? And this is not some unknown random university in the corner of whatever. This is one of the elite universities in the country. And I had someone come up to me the other day who's a Northwestern MBA grad telling me, oh yeah, they sent out an email to all of us about what was going on. That's not something that Northwestern wants to be bothering doing. They want to be promoting themselves as one of the top universities in the country, not someone with a hazing problem. So I think that ultimately there's going to be huge exposure because there appears to be so many victims. But as far as what is that number, it's a little unknown until we learn more about, the damages. But I think Northwestern is going to be looking for the exit sign as quickly as possible.
So, Michael, what should coaches and schools do when they have any notice of hazing?
Yeah, there should be a robust response to root that out immediately. Ultimately, let's look at what this was. These are kids. They're 18-year-old, 19-year-old, maybe the oldest kid on that team is 22 years old. These are kids that are running amok in a locker room. And the fact of the matter is this appears to have gone on for at least, a decade, maybe longer. And so once a school, a coaching staff doesn't do anything about it, you're sending the message that this is a free pass. You can do whatever you want in here. Nobody's going to, come down on you. There's no penalties. There's no risk to you for acting this way. So it's going to keep going on. And you're just ingraining it in the culture of the next class and the next class and the next class. So I think really a zero tolerance policy. If coaches had intervened early on and you saw players missing games, this would be over. No kid in that locker room is going to risk playing over these absurd, acts of hazing.
Michael, last question here on Legal Face-Off. You helped draft a bill that ended up strengthening Florida's anti-hazing law. Talk to us about why hazing still goes on, in your opinion, both at the university level itself and also college athletics. It seems like in this day and age, knowing what we know, and with the ability of victims to come forward and have their voice, it would seem unusual that this would still be going on, but apparently it's still very prevalent. What about the culture of universities and college sports in particular makes this a breeding ground for this type of activity?
That's a great question. Every year you hear about a tragedy. It seems like there isn't a fall or spring semester that goes by where some college student isn't getting hurt, killed, something as a result of hazing. I don't have a good answer as to why it hasn't stopped. Hazing's been around for over 100 years. But I do know that, like you mentioned before, this culture of silence, there's a desire for these people to want to belong. These are young people, like I mentioned. They want to fit in. They don't want to make waves. And when you look specifically at athletics, how can one who's in that locker room come forward and complain about what is going on, no matter how wrong it is, and then expect to be accepted by his teammates and, not expect to be retaliated against either by the coaching or the other players? And that's why in the athletic context, unless the coaching staff and the athletic department is coming down hard on this and letting it be known that we have no tolerance for this kind of behavior in our locker room, then it's just going to keep happening. He's
won Best Lawyers Award in Florida. He is with Stuart Tillman. The website is stfblaw.com. Michael Levine, thank you so much for joining us on Legal Face Off.